Welcome to Teaching That Counts, a podcast dedicated to the teaching and learning of mathematics. We discuss a variety of topics from building thinking classrooms to creating a more equitable math class. I hope that the conversations that I have with my guests help inspire you in your own classroom, school, or district, or if you're a parent like me, with your child's mathematics journey. You can find me via my website, teachingthatcountspodcast.com, or on socials at MyEstasTeach. Thank you again for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. Well, welcome to a very special bonus episode of Teaching That Counts. So I had an opportunity last week to be part of the Educational Technology Conference that the Stanislaus County Office of Education puts on in wonderful, beautiful Turlock, California. And we had an opportunity to share with some participants the joys and awesomeness of doing an educational podcast. So we just asked some questions. We talked about how to set up your own podcast and how to reach students, teachers, administrators, coaches, all the people that could benefit from listening to an educational podcast. So in this episode, this is just a bonus episode. We talked a few things education, but mostly it was about, hey, what do you guys think of starting your own podcast? So in this episode, you'll listen to some audience members at ETC 2024 and their thoughts on building thinking classrooms and utilizing podcasts and technology and some of their other favorite things that they like to listen to when they're on their way to work. So I hope you enjoy this very, very special bonus episode of Teaching That Counts. All right, so we are on the Teaching That Counts podcast, and welcome everybody for listening. As always, I'm your host, Abel Maestas, and I'm here. We're live. We're kind of live, right? Live in quotes in that I have like an audience, which is very different for my normal podcast. And I'm here with Brian Wise.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brian.
That is Brian, yes. And I'm here with the group, and we are at ETC, right? What does it stand for, ETC?
Good question. It's the Stanislaus County Office of Education's ETC conference. This is an annual conference held at Pittman High School in Turlock, California. And we have some awesome educators who've joined us on a Saturday on their own time. Thank you all for coming.
Say hi, educators. Hey. All right, cool. So we have some questions, and this podcast is an educational podcast, right? And normally we talk about math, but today we're going to expand our subject area a bit, and we have people from teachers from different areas, and I've lined up some questions. So we'll have a conversation for a little bit, and we'll have this bonus Teaching That Counts episode. So first question, if any of you would like to chime in, and if you do, you can either, when I give you the microphone, you can either say your name and where you're from, or not. and just answer the question, and we'll have a conversation that way. So if you don't want to be, your name on the podcast, that's cool. So first question I thought about: do you have any favorite educational podcasts that we kind of already currently have out there?
I really like Devin Siebold. I really like Crying in My Car.
All right, cool. What are those ones about?
So his podcasts are all about his experience as an educator in various schools and basically the problems in education. And he speaks about them in a very funny way.
Cool. We like funny.
Yes, humor is very good. I'm not very good at it, but yes. I like listening to other people who really do have a sense of humor. Yeah.
All right. He's Brian does self-deprecating humor, it sounds like.
That's right. The best kind.
Somebody else have an educational podcast they listen to often?
It's not necessarily an educational podcast for adults, but for kids. It's called Kids News, KIDZ News, N-U-Z. And it's like 2-minute clips, and they do everything from personal stuff to stuff that's going on in the world to what's going on in their hometown to saving animals. And it's just long enough that kids are able to listen to it, and it has it all written out for them too.
That's super cool. I feel like everything that's kids has to be spelled with a Z, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, everything with kids with a Z. So we've been talking, before we got onto this podcast, we were talking about some of the things that we do in podcasts, how we came about with this podcast, how, Brian, you came up with your podcast. But the question is, how can we use students? Like, how can students use these podcasts? Because we know that they're part of their world, right? So does anybody have any thoughts about how they might use this with students? Oh, we got a couple.
We have like a rally news team, but I would use this for the news team to do a podcast that students could listen to maybe before testing week on strategies they use and different coping skills that might work for them, as well as just mental health needs to meet just our students' needs as well as our teachers.
Cool, thanks.
My name is Rita, and I'm super interested in student voice and speaking back to educators. So I feel like it's important for students to maybe be able to record their thoughts about their personal experiences within education, what works for them and what doesn't, and be able to be really heard by adults. So that's one way that I'm thinking of using it.
Awesome, thank you.
Kind of along the lines of like a yearbook class, you could have a podcast where students are reporting on sports and events happening at school, and that could be a weekly, daily kind of broadcast, and kind of what you picture in movies that schools have that broadcast in the morning. It could be that kind of thing in today's world.
Cool. Awesome. So great ideas on how we can use students, how students can be engaged in podcasts. So is there anybody, when I started this podcast, teaching it counts, and the counts is in a little quotes because it's about math, right? Math teaching. I originally started with Peter Liljedahl's Building Thinking Classrooms. Is anybody familiar with that book? So one of the major pieces of that book is about getting students up and out of their seats and writing on what he calls vertical non-permanent surfaces, which basically means whiteboards. So I'm wondering, does anybody have any questions or thoughts about what they think about students getting up and being active on whiteboards as they're kind of showing their work? And I guess my question to you too is does anybody think that how that might look in a non-math class? Because I know I've had teachers ask about that.
Hi, so I actually teach both math for educators, but I also teach middle school science. And when I read Building Thinking Classrooms, I immediately brought it into my science class. And it was a great way to go around and have discussions around science concepts, observations, wonderings, and then for students to be able to collect that data, look at it all around them, and then even go back and revisit it on another day as they start going back and building on it. So I actually loved working with it in a different space other than mathematics, so definitely.
Cool. Yeah, totally see its relevancy in science.
Yeah, and I teach science as well, and I just want to echo what Rita? What Rita just said, because, yeah, my students, I know in traditional teaching methods, students were always kind of asking me to give them the answer in some fashion, and I know when you adopt some of the strategies in the Building Thinking Classrooms, they're not necessarily turning to the teacher to answer their questions. They're turning to their own thinking and maybe to each other. But that's a wonderful thing to get students more empowered for their own learning. So yeah. Any other thoughts?
Awesome.
Anybody else read Building Thinking Classrooms?
Or have any questions?
Yes.
Cool.
Hi, my name is Bliss Probst. I'm a school superintendent, so as I walk through classrooms and visit schools and classrooms, it's a really great way for me to look at like concept versus computation with mathematics and be able to have a kind of a visual glance at that in a quick way.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, I had a principal years ago, and I had my students doing the same thing, and my principal would come in. I taught AP Calculus, and this is an example when she came into my AP Calculus class, but she'd come in, she said, you know, I don't know anything that's I have no idea what's going on in that class, but I know the kids are learning because I can hear them talking about it and I can see them doing their work. But I have no idea what they're talking about because it was calculus. So I think it makes it it makes it nice, a visual, where we can see students doing work and talking about it, which is one thing I loved about it. And having him on the podcast in my end of my last season was, it was one of the best episodes I think I've been able to do. Along with one more that I would just want to shout out, I had a special ed teacher on my podcast, and she talked about how she uses this with her SPED kids. And I was able to interview some of her kids, and these kids had, these are kids with autism or other learning needs, and they were joyful about being part of the podcast and sharing their views. Sort of like you were talking about giving student voice. So I love that. I love that episode. It's still one of the highest rated episodes of Teaching That Counts. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah. And if I could just add, I was one of those kids when I was young. I was very camera shy, and I didn't like a lot of limelight and a lot of attention. Even when I was just with my family, I was out with dinner with the grandparents, and they wanted me to like sing a song I learned in school. I would run in the other room and just run away. And I think podcasts, when you just give that student an opportunity to record just the audio without the camera on, I think some of those students who are a little more shy about their appearance, that affective level kind of goes down, and maybe they're a little more willing to share their thinking because they know it's only their voice that's being recorded. So I just wanted to mention that.
Cool. So one of the things that I was able to do it was 2 weeks ago, is be part of the planning committee for the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics Regional Conference, and it was in Seattle. And in our opening session, we talked about student belonging and how do we get students to feel like they belong in math. But I'm going to ask this broader. How do we get students to feel like they belong in your class, your school, your subject, your place, so that we know that to get kids to school, they have to feel like they belong there, right? So I'm wondering, how could we use podcasts to make them feel like they belong? Especially for kids that maybe school wasn't what they feel like, where they feel comfortable. What do you guys think?
Hi, my name is Crystal Rial, and I have, it just reminds me of in our community, the sports admin. He did a podcast for athletes, so he would interview athletes and coaches. And it was just a great way for the community to come together, because even some students aren't successful with their academics, but they're really passionate about their sport, and their family tunes in because they want to hear them. Their peers are tuning in because they look up to this person. And then getting the coaches in there too, and letting them be the voice of what type of things that they talk to the students about, how they motivate them. And then just in general, because sports does bring the community together when they go and see the events. So it was really great that he had that for the community. I seen it come together, and I looked forward to hearing it. We don't have it anymore, so it's something that I see. It's still a need to have those type of things, because once he got a different job and moved away, so having somebody that is just willing to make the time to provide the space for those students to come and for their voice to be heard and share their strengths.
What a great idea. I think you have a good idea for your own school. Someone like you could do that. Anybody else have an idea?
Hi, I'm Jackie. One idea our school is trying to implement is as teachers, we work on different committees, and then that way the teachers feel connected, is having each committee report on what they're doing, so teachers could listen to it as they're getting ready to prep, but also taking that and bringing it into our schools by having someone go around and interview clubs, because then it creates buy-in, but it creates a sense of belonging as well, because everybody knows what's going on and what's happening, and might feel more equipped to join that club if they have that opportunity and are able to hear it from their peers.
Yeah, awesome suggestion. Yeah, anybody else? I think it's just an opportunity for kids to share their stories, right? We have so many awesome kids in our schools that don't get a chance to share their stories. I know at Brian's school, there's a kid, and I actually don't know this kid. I just see him every once in a while in a program that my kids are in. They're part of this program called Valley Music Institute. Basically, they form rock bands. And there's a kid goes to your school, is probably one of the best musicians I have seen. Plays the guitar, sings, has a crazy, amazing voice, a rock voice. It's like he's like a little Metallica kid, right? And I don't know what grade he's in, but it can't be higher than junior high. And I feel like that kid has a story to tell. Like, what an amazing talent. And it'd really be cool if the school could highlight that talent. I think it would be cool. I just had this idea of a podcast where every week or every 2 weeks you just have you interview a kid and let them tell their story, and what kind of empathy that might provide, or that might encourage other kids to have if they know the stories of students in their school.
Yeah. And Abel, you just mentioned my school that I work at. Just last week, I was doing a physics lesson. We just started our unit on sound waves. So I'm trying to incorporate music into the lesson. So I had this great lesson that had some examples of great music. We had some trombones playing Star Wars music, and we had a Prince guitar solo, which was amazing. And so I asked my students to share what musical instruments they play. And I thought you were going to mention one of those kids, but you said he was younger. But one of my students said he doesn't play a musical instrument, but he just got started a new job, part-time job, in Modesto. There's I guess a church where he runs the sound mixer board at the church. And it kind of reminded me that it's not just the people who do the talking into a podcast. You also have other opportunities to get students on board, whether they're the students who are running the recording equipment, or if you have a mixer, or you also have, there's also some marketing aspects to a podcast. You have to design a logo, and you have to design maybe some promotional materials. So there's a lot of opportunities for students to get involved in other ways too. They don't necessarily have to be talking on the microphone to be involved.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for my son to do the music for this podcast.
Yeah.
He's supposed to be doing the music, and he still hasn't done that, but it'll happen someday. So I'm going to open up to any questions. We're kind of coming to the end of this podcast. Are there any questions that the group here would like to ask? Either myself or Brian, about podcasts, about my podcast? All right, well, there was a really good discussion. Oh, go ahead.
Just had a quick question. Do you feel like because you're in education and you have a podcast that you have to censor things that you talk about in your podcast?
That's a really good question, and I'm sure that the folks that listen to this podcast know that I have admin, teachers, parents that listen to this podcast. I have people I'm sure that listen to the podcast that I don't even know who they are, right? But I know for sure I even have school board members that listen to the podcast. So I do think that when I talk about education, I'm really talking about things that we've experienced, and we do want to be authentic, but at the same time want to make sure that we're not going to be offensive, right? And we are keeping in mind that our audience is really looking for ideas to be in their classroom, and that's research based. So we're talking about what's happening in our class, in our opinion, but we're keeping things confidential, right? We're not going to throw out the names of students or the names of teachers unless they want to, or we're given permission. But we're going to talk about things that we know either have worked in the class, the struggles that we've had, and things that have been research-based. So there is a bit of thinking about, I wouldn't say we are walking on eggshells because we want to be real. But we also want to know that our audience is big, and we don't want to be offensive or leave anybody out. I don't know if I feel like that was a politically correct way to answer that question. But it kind of is what it is.
Yeah, and I'll just say, always comes back to the audience, in my opinion. You always have to consider who is your audience and who do you want to bring on board, whose voices do you want to bring to the table. Like for example, my podcast is very limited in topic and in scope. It's only about standards-based grading at the high school level this year. So it has a very limited audience. And so I can't really mention other things. I can't be as creative as maybe I would have liked to have been if it was a more generalized podcast, because that's the audience that I'm addressing. I'm addressing a very narrow audience of just secondary teachers who use standards-based grading. So if I start to mention, like, for example, I won't say which of us, one of us, Abel and me, one of us is a Dodgers fan and the other one is a Giants fan. So if you're familiar with California baseball, that makes us mortal enemies during baseball season. I see a lot of heads nodding in the room. So that's not something that I might mention. I mean, maybe I will.
I'll mention. I'm a Dodgers fan.
Okay, fine. Go Giants. Go Giants. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
See, there you go. But now maybe
I just lost half my audience.
Right,
just to let you
exactly.
know
Somebody's going to turn off the radio now, and they're going to miss out on some messaging.
Whole
that
Bay
we
Area is
really
not going to
wanted.
listen to my podcast. I can give you one other example. I did. I had a guest on, and we were talking about some of the research that has been done, and it went against a lot of what admin has been telling teachers. But the research that the researchers done was about, like, what are we really doing, right? So that kind of drew a lot of attention online. And so the second we had talked about this, she had mentioned, oh yeah, we talked about blah, 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 blah. And we didn't think of it too much until it kind of blew up on social media. And they were like, what do we do? And so I was like, oh my goodness. So I had to come back and talk about it and have someone clarify what that meant. But even the clarification, sometimes things are going to be different than what people believe, right? So, and that just happens. But again, we're trying to be authentic as possible. Yeah. I really appreciate everybody. Is there anybody else? Okay. I really appreciate you guys coming to our session, ETC 2024. Gosh, sorry, 2024. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't believe it. Okay.
It's a leap
you're
year,
a Giants
too.
fan. That's
It's a
why.
leap year, too, yeah. It is an even-numbered year. Yeah, the Giants always seem to do a little better in even-numbered years.
Okay.
I don't know, but you guys got that new players,
Yeah.
and you outbid the Giants, so I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'll start a baseball podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, with baseball statistics, so I still get the math people listening to my
There you
podcast.
go.
There you go.
I can join you and talk about some physics.
I don't know if we can stay in the same room though.
Magnus
Brian.
forces, how the ball carries depending on the humidity. We could make a podcast out of that, I think.
I think we can.
Yeah.
Okay, this has been a wonderful special bonus podcast. Thank you guys for being part of it, and we'll talk to everybody soon.